and welcome to Exploring with the Estuarium. My name is Ariel, and I'll be your educator. Today we're going to learn about invasive species and how they impact our ecosystem.
During this lesson, you'll get answers to questions such as, what is an invasive species? How do they impact our ecosystem? And how can I help prevent the spread of invasive species? What is an invasive species? An invasive species is a plant, animal, or other organism introduced to an area outside of its native range. Invasive species do not have to come from another country, but rather the species is in an area it has not naturally spread to. They are usually transported or spread by humans, often unintentionally. An invasive species can be any organism, such as amphibian, plant, insect, fish, fungus, bacteria, or even seeds and eggs. Invasive species tend to grow and reproduce quickly and aggressively spread, usually causing harm to the environment, economy, and even human health. Humans and the resources we use travel around the world, and with them can carry uninvited species. Aquatic species can be accidentally moved by ships. Shipping crates transport unwanted insects, and ornamental plants used in landscaping can escape into the natural ecosystem. Even pets can intentionally or accidentally become invasive species. Invasive species are a threat because many do not have natural predators to control their populations, so they can rapidly grow and reproduce. They directly impact the ecosystem by preying on native species, outcompeting native species for food and other resources, causing or carrying diseases, and prevent native species from reproducing or even killing native species young. Invasive species can also alter the food web in an ecosystem by replacing native food sources or completely collapsing the food web. They can change the diversity of species in a habitat. Some invasive species can even change the conditions in an ecosystem, like changing soil chemistry or even water flow. In Washington, there are over 700 plant and animals listed as invasive species. They contribute to $137 billion each year in crop and habitat loss. We're going to take a closer look at some of Washington's priority invasive aquatic animals. Green crabs are small shore crabs that are found in high intertidal zones and coastal estuaries. They are aggressive invaders and are opportunistic feeders that are native to the eastern Atlantic Ocean. The European green crab was introduced in San Francisco Bay by ships and spread north. They have negative impacts on native shore crab, clam, and oyster populations. Their digging has slowed eelgrass restoration efforts, and they transmit worms to shorebirds. The purple varnish clam was introduced to Washington from ship ballast water transported from Asia. It has been reported in North Puget Sound for about 10 years. The purple varnish clam grows dense colonies very rapidly, which displaces native species. They can also be harmful to humans because of their high concentration of toxins. Tunicate, also known as a sea squirt, is a marine animal that spends its life attached to docks, boats, and rocks. We have many native species of tunicates, but there are 3 invasive species that can be found in the Puget Sound from Olympia to Whidbey Island and in the Hood Canal. These little stationary animals smother out other sea life, and they have no predators because they are toxic to other species. These tunicates are a major threat to aquaculture because they compete with native filter feeders like clams, mussels, and oysters. The New Zealand mud snail is an adaptable aquatic snail that can be found in fresh and brackish water. It was found in Capitol Lake in 2009, likely introduced from uncleaned recreational equipment. They dominate habitats and can be as dense as 100,000 per square meter. New Zealand mud snails outcompete native snails and insects, causing a disruption in the food chain and leading to lower populations of fish. The bullfrog is the largest frog species in North America and compete with and prey on many native species, which specifically affects the native ecosystem. They were brought to the state through aquarium and pet stores and possibly introduced to the ecosystem by people releasing them after being used in science classes. The African cloud frog was also introduced by people in the pet trade. African cloud frogs are predatory aquatic frogs that are highly adaptable to environmental conditions. They spread disease to native amphibians and fish populations like salmon. The northern pike is a non-native predatory fish that was illegally introduced to Washington. In many states, it's a sport fish. It preys on small fish and limits the food sources for other species. They can be detrimental to native salmon populations. Not only are animals released into the wild, but so are plants. Variable leaf milfoil is an underwater aquatic plant that is native to eastern United States and can be found in freshwater lakes, ponds, and slow-moving rivers. It has dense growth that crowds out native plants, reduces habitat for fish, waterfowl, and other wildlife. Milfoil can be hazardous to swimmers and boaters. It was sold as a plant for aquarium tanks and was introduced by the dumping of unwanted aquariums or water gardens. Variable leaf milfoil can be spread if boats and other gear is not properly cleaned between visits to different lakes and rivers. Eurasian water milfoil grows underwater in a variety of still or flowing freshwater bodies and can tolerate salinity, acidity, and temperature change. Water milfoil shades out native aquatic species, inhibits water flow, and disrupts recreation such as fishing. It hybridizes with native northern milfoil and threatens the survival of native milfoil species. The dense mats cause flooding, clogging of water intakes, and is great mosquito habitat. The Eurasian water milfoil was likely spread by watercrafts and other water recreational equipment. Brazilian elodea is a freshwater plant originally sold in pet stores for aquariums, and the spread likely came from people dumping aquariums into lakes and rivers. Its dense mats choke out native aquatic plants. It also disrupts recreational activities such as swimming and fishing. Brazilian elodea also restricts water movement, traps sediment, and in the Chehalis River, it blocks passage of juvenile salmon. Even invasive grasses can cause damage. Spartina cordgrass is an aquatic grass that grows on the mudflats and marshes in coastal estuaries and the Puget Sound. It is believed that it arrived in Washington around the late 1800s in shipments of oysters from the East Coast or as packaging material on cargo ships. Spartina cordgrass colonizes saltwater areas and the edges of freshwater sources. It outcompetes native plant species, including rare and endangered, reducing marsh biodiversity and system functions. Common reed is a reed that has creeping rhizomes and typically grows in or near wetlands. Common reed displaces other wetland plants and can also displace wildlife by affecting water flow and water quality. Common reed can shut off salmon from important breeding habitat. Farmers used it in pastures for grazing and originates from Europe. You can help limit the spread of invasive species. Aquatic invasive plants and animals outcompete native species and wreak havoc on the ecosystem. They come to Washington state on trailers, boat hauls, motors, wading boots, fishing equipment, and many other recreational gear. Aquatic invasives hinder salmon recovery and damage human health. In 6 years, it has cost communities more than $5 billion nationwide to mitigate aquatic invasive species. The best way to keep our lakes, rivers, and estuaries clean and free from invasives is to clean, drain, and dry out boats and equipment. Invasive species cost the United States billions of dollars each year due to species removal, mitigation of reduced native species, and eradication. Many animals that are now invasive species were once somebody's pet that they didn't want or couldn't take care of, so they abandoned and released them into the wild. The unwanted pets that survive can cause harm to the environment. Some of the most aggressive and widespreading invasive species were originally sold as pets or plants for gardens, ponds, and aquariums. Never release unwanted pets, animals, or plants into the wild. Now we will do an activity that tests your comprehension. I will show you a picture of an invasive species, and you will have to choose how it was introduced into a new environment. Was Eurasian water milfoil introduced by watercrafts and other recreational equipment, birds dispersing seeds, or used as packaging material? It was introduced by watercrafts and other recreational equipment. Brazilian elodea was introduced by watercrafts and other recreational equipment, stuck in migrating whales' teeth, people dumping aquariums. It was introduced by people dumping aquariums. Spartina cordgrass was introduced by shipments of oysters, birds dispersing seed, or used as packaging material. It was both in shipments of oysters and used as packaging material. Were European green crabs introduced by shipments of oysters, cargo ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean, or people looking for a new food source? They hitched a ride on cargo ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Were New Zealand mud snails introduced to Washington by watercrafts and other recreational equipment, cargo ship ballast water, or people looking for a new food source? Unfortunately, it was due to people who didn't clean their watercrafts or other aquatic recreational equipment. Were bullfrogs introduced by watercrafts and other recreational equipment, people looking for a new food source, or people releasing pets in science experiments? People were illegally releasing their pets in science experiments. I encourage you to take a look around your local area and report any invasive species for safe removal. To report invasive species in the state of Washington, please visit www.invasivespecies.wa.gov/report-a-sighting.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Exploring with the Estuarium. If you liked our video, give it a thumbs up. And if you wish to continue to get more of our educational videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Facebook at the Puget Sound Estuarium. Bye!